Good morning. So my name is Dan Dooley. I'm the Chief Commercial Officer of Lynk. We do cell towers in space. So we essentially put satellites in the air, we put them as cell towers, we connect MNO spectrum, and we essentially can connect all the mobile devices in your pocket today to our satellites. So we go directly to the phones. It's different than Starlink, different than OneWeb. So start off a little bit different. Anybody here from last year? I did a presentation last year. Is anybody here from last year that actually remembers my presentation at all? Anybody? And if you did, okay, great, thank you. So if you did, not to put you on the spot, what was your takeaway from that? So was your takeaway kind of cute, innovative, futuristic, never gonna happen in my lifetime? Anybody have a takeaway that's different than that, or?
No, I think it's actually we're not too far away from it, and that's the point. I'm quite curious to hear what happened in the last year.
Perfect. So that's what I'm gonna try to do. I'm gonna try to spend about 10 minutes here and talk about less about Lynk and more about actually what other people are doing, because what other people are doing is really forming the ecosystem of what's going on. So since Genesis 2022, all of these things happened, and it literally kicked off in August. In August, it kicked off with the first T-Mobile SpaceX announcement. They did a big announcement in Boca Chica with the Occupy Mars t-shirt and the big rocket and the barbecue and the fireworks. And they had both T-Mobile and they had SpaceX, and they did a technology partnership. It's kind of a loose partnership, but essentially what it said was that SpaceX was going to take their Starlink constellation, build another bigger version of the constellation, bigger satellites, more satellites. T-Mo was going to help them with the technology to go direct to phone to solve some of the Doppler and the timing compensations. Those new satellites were going to be launched on the new rocket, which was in back of Elon Musk when he was making the announcement, which is Starship. You guys have probably seen Starship over the last couple of months. And all of that was going to bring people direct to phone, starting with text messaging sometime in the next 18 months. So that was the announcement that was made in 2022 in August, right? Kind of like 3 months after Genesis. And so what's interesting about that is, one, it's a gigantic player, jumping into this fray. It immediately legitimized, honestly, the category. Like, people now believe that it's actually true. You can do it. I don't think people actually believed that when we were pitching it the last couple of years. And they did it very hastily, to be open with you. And the reason why is because the next line down there, or the two lines down there, is in September, you had these two other big companies, Apple and Huawei, announce their satellite capability into their newest devices. And so I think T-Mo and SpaceX wanted to get ahead of that, did an announcement a couple weeks before the Apple announcement, which really said, okay, hey, look, if you were gonna buy the latest and greatest Apple, they modified the latest and greatest Apple i14 and allowed it to have SOS satellite capability from a company called Globalstar. Globalstar has satellites that are, I think they're like 1,500 kilometers in the air, so it's like 3 times where we put our satellites. We put our satellites about 500 kilometers in the air. And so with that amount of limited bandwidth, you could really only do emergency SOS. But I think for Apple, that was perfect, right? Because what Apple wants to do is they want to sell more iPhones. They want you to go to the store and say, I want to buy the iPhone 14 because it could save my life, versus an Android, right? And so that was really, again, another, this ability to have people say, you know what, I'm not going to rely just on terrestrial connectivity. I'm going to somehow embed, satellite capability into my devices. And so Apple's an interesting case where it's the latest iPhone, right? It's really only for emergency SOS. You can't do much more than emergency SOS because of where the satellites are in space. And so essentially what happens is that I have my latest iPhone, I don't have terrestrial connectivity, I'm hiking, something happens, and I say, oops, I don't have connectivity. It prompts me to say, will you be able to, do you want to send an emergency SOS? You say, yes, I do. It points you to the sky, you point the phone to the sky, and if you have the latest iPhone and you can connect to a satellite, then you can send a one-way message that says, I'm hurt, I'm being killed, whatever the emergency is, and it will save your life. And so this is a really good thing. And this did two things, right? One, it's another big player coming into it, but another one is that MNO subscriber base for the first time, it legitimizes like back to SMS, the ability to have limited connectivity. We're so ingrained in 5G and broadband and everybody going to the latest and greatest. Well, there's a ton of people out there. There's about 1 billion people that don't have cell phones, that would like to have cell phones, but don't have connectivity. So these people that don't have connectivity, and even in the States where I live, we have great connectivity, but yet now we're conditioned by Apple, which is like, okay, well, it's okay if you have a little bit of connectivity and maybe it's not always on, it can still save your life. It can still be very useful. And so that's helped not only Lynk as we go from SMS to voice to data, and it helps T-Mobile and SpaceX go from SMS to voice to data. It helps in that transition because it allows consumers to now think, okay, it's okay for me not to have broadband everywhere. I understand I'm in the middle of a mountain, I'm hiking. If I can send a message, like that's great. That's invaluable to me to do. And so those two things happened in September. I believe the Huawei emergency SOS, you also need an app on the phone. I think that's true. And so that's interesting. So then in September of 2022, another direct-to-phone category, and I put the two, Apple and the Huawei, in a different color. I don't know if it's coming off here, but because those are really features. Those are really not, they're not looking to go to voice and broadband. They can't go to voice and broadband with the satellites that they have. They're too far up in the air. They're just literally too far away from Earth to be able to do voice and broadband. So the folks that are doing voice and broadband eventually are the first one, SpaceX, obviously Lynk, and then this September of 2022 with AST and Science, they launched their first test satellite. This test satellite is gigantic. It is 4 tennis courts wide. And they've got some pretty good backers. Vodafone, Rakuten, both invested in AST and Science. And then they deployed this gigantic bird in the air that folded out. It's pretty cool, actually. But it's very, very big, and there's a lot of question about orbital debris. And so they've had a hard time getting regulatory approval, getting a government to say, yeah, I'm gonna be liable for that satellite, because it's the biggest thing, it's the second brightest object in the sky right now. So they're having a little bit of issue with that. Fast forward, maybe to last month, AST and Science actually got a voice call over GSM done on AT&T Spectrum. So that's kind of neat. So you can start to see the beginning of the technology kind of coming out. They need to get regulatory approval. They're going to need to launch 25 or 30 more of these gigantic satellites. They're going to need somebody some country to say, yes, I'll take liability for it. So they've got some hurdles. Apple and SpaceX obviously have to get the new rocket Starship done. They have to get the new version 2. They have to test it and go off UR. Of course, we're operational now. We're the only company on the planet that's patented, proven on Earth, and commercially viable now to do commercial services in 2 different countries and growing each day. Then in January, Qualcomm and Iridium sort of did one up to Apple. So again, that's in that same blue color where it's a feature, right? So Qualcomm and Iridium, they said, well, we don't want to be left out of this party. Now, Apple's got this amazing marketing advantage where people come into a store and they're going to want to buy the latest Apple, not the latest Android, because the latest Apple has save your life connectivity. So they did the same thing. They did it better, to be open with you. They did it better than the Globalstar solution, because the Globalstar solution is really high up again, very, very low bandwidth. This, again, is high up. It's low bandwidth, but it's more bandwidth would allow basically the Snapdragon, any device with Snapdragon in it, to basically do a 2-way messaging. So that actually is something that's a little bit sexier than the Apple SOS. It's not just for SOS. You can also do text messaging. What's unknown in this whole ecosystem is who's monetizing it, right? So clearly, SpaceX wants to have partnerships with some carriers around the globe. They've announced, obviously, T-Mo, they've announced Salt in Europe, they've announced One in New Zealand, and they announced Rogers in Canada. And they also have their own spectrum, and they can also take their spectrum and go direct to consumers, right? So you got to be careful if you're an MNO exactly what the plan is, because if you have a Starlink terminal, you can easily now upsell your Starlink subscription to do direct to device. And AST is going directly to MNOs like we are, so that they're clearly doing the MNO through a channel. Qualcomm and Iridium are a service, and I'm not sure how they're going to monetize it. So you're going to buy a subscription from Iridium? I don't know. You're going to buy a subscription from Apple? I don't know. For emergency SOS? And frankly, once somebody has extension of your terrestrial connectivity, because that's what we're talking about at Lynk, that's what AST is talking about, that's what T-Mo's talking about. Once we extend your connectivity, it'll never get to that emergency SOS, because you're always going to have, your phone's always going to think it's under terrestrial connectivity. It'll never get to that satellite. So those are really features. In March of this year, the FCC announced an NPRM, Notice of Proposed Rulemaking, to allow this to happen. Of course, we are the only company on the planet that's certified by the FCC to allow it. And that you've seen a lot of governments kick off. We've gotten regulatory approval in 27 countries across the globe. Regulators are very forward-leaning about this. Essentially what we're asking for, the MNO is asking for, is to repurpose their terrestrial spectrum to also go to satellites, which is a pretty easy lift because regulators want them to provide ubiquitous service, and so off they go. And then we have, of course, signed Rogers as well. So you said, well, wait, SpaceX signed Rogers too. Well, yeah, we both signed Rogers. Rogers picked both us and SpaceX. SpaceX is 1900. Rogers has 1900 spectrum. We do sub 1 gigahertz spectrum, so they picked us for the lower bands, they picked SpaceX for the upper band. So there's a lot of stuff that's gone on in the last year since I was here at Genesis. And essentially my takeaway here for all of you is that, in the next year, there's going to be even more. And you're going to see some constellations. There may be a consolidation here because I don't know, is there room for 3 or 4 or 5? This is high CapEx. This is not for the weak. You need some money. So obviously SpaceX, pretty sure eventually when they get Starship going, they'll make it work. We feel like we're in a good position because, obviously we've been in it for 5 years now. So I spent most of my time on that. I won't spend any more of my time on who we are. Obviously, we are the only ones that are patented proven, the ability to connect a satellite to an unmodified phone. I just want to show you this video because this is the best way to think about it, and I'll leave it with this. Essentially, this is a real flight data. This is from Lynk Tower 1. This is our first cell tower in space. We have 3 cell towers in space, all capable of doing 2G and 4G. The last one has a 5G radio. But essentially, you can see over Mongolia, this is one of our partners, Unitel in Mongolia, and as the satellite flies over, it puts down a beam that's incredibly like a cell site on Earth, incredibly like a cell site on Earth. In fact, the edges are exactly like a cell, so it doesn't go into the terrestrial, doesn't interfere with terrestrial, it has good boundaries to it. All of these dots are devices in this town in Mongolia that has no service, that didn't have terrestrial connectivity, that looked to the satellite traveling at 8 kilometers a second, 500 kilometers up in the air, and they all tried to connect. These are all customers that Unitel and Mobicom will be able to get in this town with a cell tower in space. And so if you think about this, we have the ability to put down a beam anywhere on the Earth right now. The issue is not necessarily geographic coverage, the issue is time coverage, because you need to have a lot more satellites because this thing travels really, really fast. So it's gone in 5 minutes. But in 5 minutes, you can see here, and a picture's worth 1,000 words, this is really what we're talking about as allowing MNOs to be able to use your existing spectrum that's maybe latent in this area of your country to be able to provide direct-to-hand site. And again, our satellites work on any 3GPP device. It doesn't have to be the latest iPhone or latest Snapdragon. Any 3GPP device, any old 2G IoT device works. And so just to leave you with that, we've signed over 30 contracts with MNOs. We got regulatory approval, I think, in 27 countries. We're actively testing in 20 countries. We're live and operational in 2 countries. I expect that to run even more in the future. And I think when I come to you next year and we talk about this again, we'll probably have another laundry list of entrants or successes, and we'll see how this plays out. But certainly, this is the best way, I think, right now for MNOs to extend your territory without having to put CapEx and without having to change your subscribers' phones. And really, we're really thinking now it's getting much more real than it was last year. So thank you very much. Sorry for